Hello, this is Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com, and welcome as we continue on our study going through the book of Isaiah. So today we are up to Isaiah chapter 18. Now, chapter 18 is interesting in that some commentators and people who have studied it out thoroughly through the book of Isaiah, some of these people call Isaiah chapter 18 one of the harder or hardest chapters to understand in the book of Isaiah. But I don't think that is the case. I don't think that has to be the case. Some commentaries will state that chapter 18 is about Ethiopia, or is about Egypt, or is about Arabia, or some will even say that it's about the United States and future prophecy of Antichrist. So how do we know which of those is correct? If any of them, maybe it is something else. How do we understand chapter 18? Well, Isaiah chapter 18 is not hard to understand if you are staying within context, within the terminology that the Bible uses, especially in prophecies, and especially a lot of the terminology that Isaiah has already laid out for us, and we stay on topic. So we need to keep with the pattern that we've already been seeing as Isaiah has been unfolding before us. We need to stick to what topic is it talking about now, and what's the context, and what groups of topics has it been in for a while, and it seems to be continuing in chapters after this. So basically, we just need to keep going. We've already gone through the first 17 chapters of Isaiah. Hopefully that is fresh in your mind. Having the first 17 chapters of Isaiah fresh in your mind, we should be able to continue on with chapter 18, keeping that within context, topic, and terminology of what we've already seen in the previous 17 chapters. When we do that, we see that Isaiah chapter 18 is not actually hard to understand. It's pretty plain. So let's take a look at this little chapter. Chapter 18 is, I believe, 9 verses. No, it is 7 verses. So chapter 18 is pretty short, and it can be plain and easy to understand. Just keep the pattern, the context, the topic, and the terminology straight as you're going through Isaiah. Now, the very first verse says, "Ho, land shadowed with wings, that is beyond the rivers of Cush." Now, notice it's saying ho. Now, some Bible translations will say whoa, like whoa, this is a whoa, this is a whoa. But literally it's not whoa, it is ho. Well, what's the difference between whoa and what's the difference between ho? Well, woe is judgment, or an oopsie, or uh-oh, right? You know, we have the 3 woes in the book of Revelation. Okay, ho is a call to of attention. Look here, pay attention to this. So this ho is to be distinguished from, for example, the beginning of chapter 15 that says the burden of Moab, and how we've been reading the burden of this place, the burden of that place. Here is not a woe, it's not a burden of, it is a ho. In other words, it's a yoo-hoo, pay attention. Okay, and it's saying the land shadowed with wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush. Now, that is referring to Ethiopia, but also this location is pointing us to Egypt as well. So how's it both Ethiopia and Egypt? It's because the Ethiopia kingdom at this time also included southern Egypt. And the king of Ethiopia at this time had strong influence over all of Egypt. So we see that chapter 18, if we see verse 1 here, is referring to Ethiopia, how it's going to smoothly continue on and transition into chapter 19, where chapter 19, the very first sentence is the burden of Egypt. Okay, so this is an attention to the Ethiopians at this time when this prophecy was written. Remember, this all happened. It is now history to us, but it was prophecy to them at this time. Okay, so this is yoo-hoo, Ethiopians, pay attention. Why? Because we're reading in the section to where Assyria goes in and takes down the house of Israel. And we read in the previous chapter how Assyria also takes down Damascus at around that same time as well, because house of Israel and Damascus, they're neighbors right next to each other. So why not, Assyria, kill two birds with one stone, right? Let's be efficient. Okay, so now it's giving a warning, or not really a warning, it's a call of attention to the Ethiopians, which also included southern Egypt, because Assyria is going to be going after them next, and then down into Egypt, which is naturally where they're going to flow from the kingdom of Ethiopia at that time. So verse 1, Ho, land shouted with wings, that is beyond the rivers of Cush. Cush is another name for Ethiopia in the Bible. It can also refer to Egypt. And again, Ethiopia and Egypt kind of overlap a bit in the Bible at this time, because Ethiopia included southern Egypt, but the king of Ethiopia influenced all of Egypt. Verse 2, that is sending by sea ambassadors, even with implements of reed on the face of the waters. Go, ye light messengers, unto a nation drawn out and peeled, unto a people fearful from its beginning and onwards, a nation meeting out by line and treading down, whose land floods have spoiled. So we got two different peoples being referred to now. So we have the Ethiopians. Okay, that's the land shadowed with wings. That's the one that has the messengers. Okay, and then we have, who are the messengers going unto? They're going to a nation drawn out and peeled. As we continue reading in this chapter, we see that that is Israel, and specifically the northern kingdom of Israel, the house of Israel, not the house of Judah. Okay, and notice also whose lands have spoiled. Whose land floods have spoiled. Okay, literally it says floods. Some translations will say rivers here, but literally it is floods when you translate it literally from the Hebrew. And this is referring to floods destroying the house of Israel's land. Did floods destroy the house of Israel's land during the Assyrian or the Ashur captivity? No. Floods prophetically often means soldiers, troops in war. And we also see floods used in this way in the book of Revelation. So in prophetic language, floods oftentimes means soldiers, just like a figurative language in prophecy and just throughout the Bible in general refers to people as trees or some type of plant, and what type of tree or plant you are is up to you. If you are a Christian tree or if you are a worldly tree, for example. And that's why the Bible talks about both Old and New Testaments. Jesus says, by their fruits ye shall know them. A person can say that they are a Christian tree, but if as a Christian tree they're not producing Christian fruits, then they're really not. It's like saying you're an apple tree but you grow oranges. You can say you're an apple tree all day long, but come on, you're an orange tree. You're producing oranges, not apples. So here we have the symbolic language, and this is, like I said, it's a prophetic terminology, floods. And you'll see this if you want to correlate the appearance of the word floods in both Old and New Testaments inside the prophetic books. You'll see that quite often, most of the time, these floods, you'll see contextually refer to soldiers. Okay, so these floods who are spoiling the house of Israel's land, this is prophesying the Assyrian or the Ashur, same people's captivity, okay? Which of course has already happened at this point. When this was written, it had not happened yet, it was being prophesied. Now often, literally, in the Hebrew and in the Greek, prophecy, when there was a foretelling of a future event, would often be said in past tense, and that's what this is here. And you'll see that a lot in the book of Revelation in the Young's literal translation, because Young's literal translation stays with the correct past and future tenses that the Hebrew and Greek had. They don't change it to the type of tenses that we're used to reading as English-speaking people. So not always, but quite often, when a future for sure event was prophesied, you'll see literally, such as in the Young's literal translation, it's mentioned in past tense as it already happened. And a simplified reason, one of the reasons as to why that is because it's so certain to come to pass that they write it or verbally speak it as if it already happened, because it's so certain to occur. And then when you're reading past events, like story accounts, for example, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, etc., Moses and the Ten Commandments, a lot of times we'll see these type of accounts of past accounts, literally in the Hebrew and Greek, and in the Young's literal translation, written in present tense. But it's a past thing. Why is it written in present tense? Because, again, a simplified reason is because when telling a true story, it was important for the person to be transported there. It's the closest to time travel as we can get. It's supposed to transport us back to that time so that when we are reading it or hearing that story being spoken to us in present tense, we are to envision it as if it's happening before our very eyes, as if we traveled back into time at that time period and are watching it take place while it was taking place. So that's a few things to keep in mind here. All right, so thus the reason why we have whose lands have spoiled, okay? Whose land floods have spoiled. This was a prophetic future event that hadn't happened yet at this point, but it is written as past tense because it was so certain to happen that it was written as if it already did. Okay? Verse 3. All ye inhabitants of the world. So first it was calling to Ethiopia and southern Egypt and saying, guess what, guys? A flood of soldiers is going to overtake the house of Israel. And Ethiopia and Egypt, they're coming for you too. Okay? But now it's opening this up and saying, by the way, this isn't just a yoo-hoo or a sign to Ethiopia and Egypt. This is a sign to the whole world. Verse 3, all ye inhabitants of the world, and ye dwellers of earth, at the lifting up of an ensign, it's like a banner or a sign given a signal, on hills ye look, and at the blowing of a trumpet ye hear. So it's saying, yeah, just like you get your signs and your signals when war is about to happen, or when the enemy soldier is about to overtake your land. You get these signs, you get these signals. So Ethiopia, look out. While you're trying to come to Israel, and possibly trying to offer an alliance, it doesn't matter if an alliance is offered or not, because Assyria/Ashur was the rod of God at that time, bringing judgment upon specific peoples, especially the house of Israel. Okay? Now, verse 4 says, for thus said Jehovah unto me, I rest and I look on my settled place, as a clear heat on an herb, as a thick cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before harvest, when the flower is perfect, and the blossom is producing unripe fruit, then hath one cut the sprigs with pruning hooks, and the branches he hath turned aside, cut down. So God is saying he's resting. He's not standing up and defending Israel as he had done so many times in the past. He is going to let Assyria/Ashur go ahead and take the house of Israel captive. Now remember, we've read throughout Isaiah so far about the remnant that God saves. The remnant that is true to Jehovah God, the one true God. Okay? So we see here God's resting. He's like, take them. Take them, Ashur. I'm going to just, you want to take them? I'm not going to protect them from you. I'm going to protect my small remnant. Take the rest. Okay, so now, and then notice here in verse 5, for before harvest, when the flower is perfect and the blossom is producing unripe fruit, then hath one cut the sprigs with pruning hooks, and the branches he hath turned aside, cut down. Again, paralleling which we have read previously here in these Isaiah prophecies about the judgment that was coming and has come onto the house of Israel. That they're like trees, or they're like wheat or grain growing in the field, getting chopped down and harvested. They are being cut down. But notice, now here it's giving even more information. They're being cut down before they're even ripe yet. They're unripened harvest being cut down. The house of Israel didn't even have enough foresight or time to prepare for the judgment that came upon them. Verse 6, they are left together to the ravenous fowl of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, and summered on them hath the ravenous fowl, and every beast of the earth wintereth on them. Now this can be going along with the symbolism of the unripened fruits and flowers being chopped to the ground, detached from the plant of which they were attached to, so they can no longer continue growing. And now animals and birds are going to pick at and eat this unripe fruit. It's like a waste. But this also gives us a little inkling, a little picture, a little yoo-hoo about the final judgment that God lets come upon the world, and that final battle being the battle of Armageddon, Har-Mageddon on Megiddo. And we read about that in Revelation chapter 19. Okay, and we read about in both Old Testament prophecies about Armageddon as well as in the book of Revelation how there will be so many dead bodies from the Armageddon battle that God will gather together the fowls of the heavens, the birds that eat carrion, for example, buzzards and whatnot, and he will gather them together and they will go to Megiddo and they will pick out the bones of the dead and eat the dead, because there's going to be so many dead bodies that if we didn't have this fowl coming and eating at their flesh, there was going to be some pretty serious rampant disease, filth, and stink, because it would be too much for people to get cleaned up fast enough before a lot of rot and decay set in. So it's like this is a little nod to that as well, to the future prophecy of Armageddon with the mentioning of these birds. Okay, verse 7, at that time brought is a present to Jehovah of hosts, a nation drawn out and peeled. What's the nation drawn out and peeled? We read about it in verse 2. The nation drawn out and peeled is a house of Israel. Okay, and then we continue on. Of a people fearful from the beginning hitherto, a nation meting out by line and treading down, whose land floods have spoiled, unto the place of the name of Jehovah of hosts, Mount Zion. So there would be a remnant from the Assyrian or the Ashur invasion of the house of Israel, a remnant of people that would be a gift unto Jehovah God because they would stay true to him. 2, a gift unto Jehovah God because his judgment has come. And 3, a gift unto Jehovah God because when the Assyrians or Ashur tried to take the house of Judah, the southern kingdom, no. They were not allowed to take Judah, the house of Judah, or the southern kingdom. Now, Judah saw all this stuff happening to the house of Israel, but they didn't repent. So God eventually used as his rod the kingdom of Babylon to later take down the house of Judah. But this concludes our study on Isaiah chapter 18. I will see you next time where we will get into chapter 19 in our Isaiah study. Have a blessed day.